Falchikaji, Kaura Saguran.
Falchigo Korain on Sahoya.
Welcome to Conversations in the Grove, a show about Druidry in ancient and modern times. Thank you for joining us for our fourth episode of season 1. In our first season, we're discussing the relationship between animism and Druidry. And in our first episode, we defined animism and we discussed the similarities between animism, Druidry, and polytheism. In our second episode, we looked at druids as healers and the significance of plants and druid and animistic practices. And in our third episode, we discussed the ethics and responsibilities of druidry and animism. Now, if you haven't had the opportunity to view our first 2 full episodes and the first 30 minutes of our third episode, you can watch them for free by going to Dunmore Druid Order's public group Facebook page or the Dunmore Druid Order's YouTube channel, and we ask you to please remember to like and subscribe. If you'd like to support our efforts, please consider becoming one of our Patreon supporters by going to patreon.com/conversationsinthegrove. Thank you. Before we get started today, we're going to do things in a slightly different fashion, and I'd like to take a moment and turn things over to Brendan, who's going to share a prayer with us.
Power of raven be ours, power of eagle be ours, power of the ancient ancestors. Power of storm be ours, power of moon be ours, power of fiery sun. Power of sea be ours, power of land be ours, power of radiant sky. Goodness of sea be ours, goodness of land be ours, goodness of the great expanse of sky. Each day be joyous to us, no day be grievous to us. Honor and compassion be with us always. Love of each face be ours. A death, good and peaceful, be ours. And the wisdom of the old ones bless us and encompass us on every side. Guide our every step in beauty, this night and this day, this night and evermore.
Thank you, Brendan. And keeping with the idea of doing things just slightly differently today, I'd like to turn things over to Ben for a moment before we get started and give him the opportunity to express gratitude to some very special people.
Yeah, before we begin, this will be something we'll be doing on every episode from here forward. We just want to acknowledge the fact that we're broadcasting from traditional Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne land.
Thank you, Ben. So for today's show, we'll be discussing Druidry, animism, and animals. So most practicing Druids have an awareness and more specifically a reverence for animals. It's believed that animals, much like plants and trees, are considered in many ways to be sacred to the Druids. So some of us believe that animals have a type of inner knowledge that we humans can learn from, whether it be through quiet observation or in more proactive roles, such as care, things like shelter, feeding, protection, and so forth, which we do already for our domestic pets. For aspiring and practicing Druids and Druidesses, we can learn more about animals by studying animal lore through myth and legendary traditions. And although there is not one main source of information that discusses specific symbolism for animals, there are some commonalities among Celtic myths, which have minor variations based on region and time frame. So to start our discussion today, I'm going to turn things over to both Brendan and Ben and give you each an opportunity to share the ideas that you might have that kind of focus on the fact that there are many different myths that have detailed animal images, such as the Well of Seagas and the Salmon of Wisdom from Ireland, or from Wales, the Tale of Gwion Bach and Taliesin. So I'm wondering, Ben, I guess we'll begin with you. What myths or folk tales come to mind when we discuss animal lore?
Well, one of the ones there were a few that I was thinking about before we started today, and there's really 3 that for some reason came to mind the most. First one was actually the story about the Muncher Neve, which are the Medians when they come to Ireland for the first time, and they have their conflict with the Fauri and the Fomorians, And um, the original Conan the Barbarian, which is Conan, who was a Fomorian lord, um, and a tower that he had built on Tory Island, which is north of Ireland. And the when the in their conflict with the Muncher Neve, or the Nemedians, who are the ancestors of the Tuatha, they're not able to break into Conan's tower without the help of a large pack of wolves that come from the other world. And they are the ones who make it possible for the Tuatha to break through the walls and get into the tower to defeat the Fauri. And it's an initial example of how they're treated in the lore and treated, by society as a whole. Now, wolves tend to have, among a lot of European cultures, kind of a sinister reputation. And one of the things I like about this story is that they're enabling the Sidhe to create a new era. They're breaking through the barriers of the forces of chaos and aiding people, aiding the holy people. If you translate Muncher Neve, it just means the holy people, or the people of sanctuary. There's another number of different things you can translate it to. So that's the first one I think of, and then the Hawk of Akil and his dialogue with Fintan. So Fintan is one of the figures out of the lore who is one of the first men to come to Ireland in the beginning, and he transforms throughout his incarnations into various different animals. Starts out as a salmon and goes through a bunch of different incarnations as different animals. And it's because of Fintan that we know the whole history of Ireland, because he's witnessed it personally through these different animal eyes. And then the third one I thought of was the transformation of Scythe, who is Finn McCool's wife, by a dark druid into a deer, and the birth of her son taking place, and Finn's son taking place in deer form, Isheen, which means little fawn. So those are the three that I think of that came to me the most when we were prepping for the show.
Yeah. How about you, Brendan?
The first story I thought of, interestingly enough, was an Irish folktale, which is not that commonly known, called The Black Dog of the Wild Forest. I don't know if you guys know that tale, but
No.
it's it's not, part of the mythological cycles, etc. It's just a folktale, but it's the story of a chieftain's son, or a prince, who basically is exiled by his father in order to save him, to protect him from this huge black dog. And this is the black dog of the Sidhe as a motif that comes up again and again in Irish lore. But the story of this particular tale is that this young man is exiled by his father to go away from this place where the black dog is coming each year and ravaging the community. And there's a similar theme to the dynamics with the Fomóra, to the need to sacrifice, right? To give something to appease these dark forces. So the village people have to give a son or a child of a high-ranking person each year to appease the black dog, so the black dog won't kill anyone else in the community. and so it's this prince's turn to be the sacrificial offering. So his father, the chieftain, sends him away. And then on his journey, he meets these three wise women or witches in the forest, and they're all sisters. And one refers him to the next in succession in order to sort of complete his quest. But interestingly, they provide him, and this is why I thought of the story, they provide him with these dog companions along the way, little, normal sized dogs. And so he's under the threat of this black dog who's chasing him down through the whole narrative. But he has these two dogs to protect him, and they're named Hear All and See All. So they have this sort of supernatural quality to them. And it turns out that in the end, they ask him, and this is another motif that comes up in folktale, which maybe we can go into a little bit later, is really fascinating, I think. But they ask him, these dogs at the end of the narrative, who are now his dear companions who have saved his life multiple times, they ask him to cut off their heads. And he's horrified and he can't bring himself to do it. And they beg and plead and say, no, please cut off our heads. So with tears streaming and a broken heart, he finally takes out his sword and obliges them and decapitates them. And he weeps and grieves, and then he's on his way back now to the village, having dispensed with the black dog finally. And then it turns out that these two dogs are spirits. They come back as beautiful young women, and then become his wives. And it's a fascinating motif. So I thought of that, and then of course I thought of Fenton and the transformations of Fenton, and I also thought of the story of Macha coming out of sort of the horse motif around Macha as sovereignty, and her taking on human form to enter a man's house, and then later resuming a horse form to run a race in order to try to save this stupid man that she'd married. And so that whole thing I think is really fascinating too. The idea that particularly, let's say, divine souls, we're speaking in an animistic context. So souls that would be considered divine, or having been gone through a process of divinization in some form, that those souls can take on animal form, and even ancestral souls who may not be divinized per se, but ancestral souls can take on animal form and come back into the manifest middle world in order to do some good work or another, right? In order to facilitate the growth of wisdom or transformation for a person or the community. So anyway, those are the kind of the stories and the motifs that I thought of.